I'm Rob Wolcott, a professor of innovation at the Kellogg School of Management at Northwestern and an avid fan of Zeeves and Zeeves' team here at Social Innovation Summit and Landmark. It's great to be here. I have to say, I have never been to CES before. I have this thing. I don't really like really large conventions, conferences, because I don't really like people much. And the thing is, no offense if you're people. But 170,000 people, I feel a weight on the top, and you're walking through, and it's exciting, and you see all the things, and the talking ducks and all those things is really neat. But there's like a personal space problem, and your feet hurt, and my good friend Bob Hendrickson, who's here, taught me to walk through the stations because they have softer carpeting. So you learn these things, and it's weird, but when I walked in here at ARIA to the Social Innovation Summit, it was like a yoga retreat. It's calm, and your people are all so nice, and it's relaxed, and we're talking about saving the world, and it's just wonderful. So it's great to be here with personal space in a yoga retreat. So this topic, Zeev and team asked me to moderate or introduce, and I'm doing some moderating this afternoon. Not really because I have any expertise in inclusion. I admit that's not my field. But it's certainly important to all of us, and we'll come back to that quite a bit in the next hour and a half, in the next few sessions. So I said, what do I do to set this all up? It's not my expertise. It's not the thing I do. And I realized we all have access to this question, and my closest and best teachers are my two kids. My wife, Ada Young, who originally is from Hong Kong, and my two children, Jolie and Sage, two young ladies that amaze me and inspire me every day. And a couple stories popped to mind for me. Nate earlier referred to origin stories, and I feel like I'm in a long origin story for each of them right now, and it's very exciting. So last year I was sitting at the island in our kitchen with my, at the time, 7-year-old Jolie, and I said, just off the cuff, Dad's question that still gets answered now that she's, only 7 years old. In a few years, no questions get answered. But for now, you're getting an answer here and there. I said, so what did you learn at school today? What's going on? And there was a pause, and she looked at me and she said, I love math. And I immediately clammed up and started crying. I started tearing. And Jolie looked at me and said, well, Daddy, what's wrong? Are you okay? I said, no, everything's great. Everything's great. These are tears of joy. Just make sure they don't fuck that up. And she said, I didn't say that. I would have gotten in big trouble with my wife. So she had this spark and this excitement, and I didn't do anything to push that. She's discovering it on her own, unencumbered. And then at dinner, not too long after that, we're sitting there, Ada, Jolie, Sage, my, at the time, 6-year-old, and myself, and we're talking about family origins. So I'm English and German, and their mother was born in Hong Kong, grew up in New Jersey. Her whole family, we did the 23andMe thing, all the genetics. Ada's literally like 99% Han Chinese. There are a lot of Chinese, it turns out. And I am almost 100% English and German. And so we're talking about this. And then there's a pause, and Sage looks at me and says, so we're half Chinese, and Mommy's Chinese. I said, that's right. And she said, Daddy, how come you're not Chinese? And I thought about it, and I said, well, that's an interesting question. And thus ensued this sort of proto-sex ed discussion, but we didn't really go into all the sort of details. So this caused me to think about the notion of race, inclusion, gender, opportunity, interest, culture. So another way I started to think about this notion of inclusion is by its opposite, because it is in conflict or in dialectic with something else, which is exclusion. So I'd like you to think for a second. We all have experienced exclusion in various ways, but there's one way I suspect we have all experienced poignantly some version of exclusion, and that was junior high school. Somewhere in that middle school, junior high school space. When you're in elementary school, everything's fine, everybody's happy, everybody's wonderful, but then there was a moment where social hierarchies and peacock feathers and all these things start to rear their ugly heads, and for the first time in your life, you're not invited to the party. Or you're not feeling comfortable sitting down with the cool kids. Remember that. How did that feel? That's called exclusion. It could be active, it could be passive, but it's that kind of action and experience that not only affects us emotionally, but affects our vision of ourselves and our vision of other people and how we can reach out and connect and be together or not be together, and what we can even accomplish. Inclusion or exclusion affects our vision of ourselves and what is even possible in the world. We like to talk about it in terms of organizations. What can we as a business, as a university, as a social innovation summit do to be more inclusive, to bring people in, to engage? But the other side of this coin, by the way, is not just what we do as institutions and leaders, but also what we do as individuals, for ourselves, for our families, for others in our organizations and others in the world. So it's not just about what we do for our organizations, but what do we do to inspire others to become the best selves they can be? So anyway, that's a little bit of a spin up. One last point, I loved the duck. How many people loved the duck? Wasn't that wonderful? But I have to note that there was an original mechanical duck, and this was called the canard digestif. It was invented by Wolcott in France in 1739. It was all the rage in Versailles. He was famous for making automata, automated mechanical equipment, and people weren't entirely sure how he was doing what he was doing. And it's interesting that at that moment we were creating robots, and here at CES, a robot in every corner. Most of them are actually mechanical, some are human. And why? Because that was the Enlightenment. And we are in the midst of a conflict between Enlightenment and the reaction against experts right now, and the robots are on the rise. In any case, with that, I have the pleasure to introduce our first panel. Mr. Bon and Bo, many of you know, have met him many times before, will moderate a discussion with Sandy Rowland and Becky Frankowitz about diversity is not inclusion. Bonin.